Ladies and gentlemen, today we talk about my thoughts on Biomutant after having just beaten the game, the main story that is, and doing some of the side quests and all that. But, it's one of those things where I think this game was highly anticipated. It had some really cool RPG elements. The marketing was neat. The world and the IP was different. It was this mutated, polluted future where, you have all these kind of crazy gene mutations and there's monsters and all kinds of RPG elements, and the game was exciting. Everyone was really looking forward to it. And I think the launch was not well received for many reasons that we'll get into. But I wanted to, do my due diligence and actually finish the game, play it all the way through. Now, I have not played the latest patch. They have put out a bug fixing patch that might make things a little bit better. So maybe we try that and talk about that in a different video if I end up doing that. But let's talk about my experience with Biomutant. I think I put about 15 hours into it. The main story is not too crazy long. It's probably like 10 to 12 hours long. And then the gameplay itself can be a little bit longer if you do the side quests, but I don't know how many people actually did. So first thing with Biomutant, if I were to summarize my thoughts on it, I would say that it has really good bones. And what I mean by that is the systems in the game are really cool. I think the crafting system is neat. There's a lot of different ways you can modify and change. There's a lot of different add-ons onto your gear and weapons that make things really cool. There's a lot of neat abilities in the game, both on the magic side with your psi points, spending it and doing psi powers, and also doing, what's called Wung Fu, which is your martial arts melee ranged combat, kind of like just being a bruiser mercenary kind of thing. I think there's a lot of really cool abilities in there and some good camera work that can make it all come together. And the idea that you have these world eaters saving eating the world tree, you're driven to save it. You want to make sure that the world tree doesn't go down. And then there's like this story about the world being polluted and this being some mutated future. If I had to summarize Biomutant, I would say that it has good bones, but they under-delivered in a lot of ways. It's almost like, it feels like they were checking boxes with the things they needed in the game. And I don't really know how this development went. I know 101, they haven't been doing games like this too many times before, right? They've been around, but this is like their kind of like one of their big step up. Hey, let's give it a shot. But it feels like the combat was pretty sluggish and buggy. There's a lot of scuffedness to the way you interact with enemies, the way you use your abilities. Things just, half the time my abilities just went off somewhere in a random direction. And there's just a lot of quality of life polished things that you would expect to have in the game already for something that was $60. I don't think this game was worth $60. I think if they bug fix it and they polish it up, it's probably a great $40 game, but I don't know if it has earned the $60 slot, which is tough because games are still getting more expensive. We're going to be moving into an $80 bracket baseline without, extra content pretty soon within the next year or so. And that's probably going to keep going up just because as technology gets better, as the engines get better, as the cost of marketing gets higher, making games gets more expensive. And so that inflation is obviously going to end up, in the hands of the consumer, right? We're going to have to keep paying more for higher budget games, right? That's why you'd expect things like Returnal, capitalizing on the PS5, getting to $80 and so on. So Biomutant, I don't think earned $60. I think they just needed like a really good UX designer to go in and make everything feel better. And I think they needed a couple of gameplay designers to go in and make the combat feel better. And they probably needed some veteran programmers and platform engineers to come in and make everything function better, because it felt like there wasn't a lot of polish in the gameplay itself, right? You'd get hit by things that you had already dodged. The abilities wouldn't always do what you told them to. There were it's kind of like this artificial difficulty where they don't tailor make the AI properly. And an example of this is the ranged units had that kind of like cheater AI accuracy where they never miss and they're always shooting. And then you're locked in these long animations, like you go knock someone up in the air and doing a melee combo, or you're building up one of your melee finishers. And while you're doing this, there's ranged units at distance that are shooting with scary accuracy and just slamming your health bar down, which never feels good. It never feels good to be up against an AI enemy that doesn't miss and is always hitting you, right? Like there's no gameplay, no dodging. The only gameplay is, well, CC or kill the ranged guys. Like you can't dodge the ranged, you can't deal with it. And I think a lot of the boss fights, core, they were really fun. There's the 4 puff monsters, like the world eaters, and then you have the final boss of the game, which ended up having a bunch of phases. And I think, again, great bones. Like there's some cool mechanics in those, some cool visuals as well as you're going into the arenas to fight these things. They had awesome ideas where each puff world eater fight was on a different vehicle, right? So it kind of like made that fight even more unique and different from the others. There's one that's underwater that you fight in a submarine. You fight one on horseback. You fight one on top of a glider. Like there's just all these really cool fights that you get to see. I think it's just, it didn't function very well, and it wasn't very difficult either. So I think that if they can find a way to make the combat smooth, and maybe they did that with the recent bug fix patch, maybe they didn't, but smooth out the combat and then make everything feel a little more fluid, the game would feel awesome, because it's almost like you're getting your immersion broken every 5-10 seconds while you're playing Biomutant. And a lot of times the decisions you're making don't feel all that meaningful. It's like you're on rails anyway. The dialogue was also an interesting choice. I can see them kind of wanting to go with a, I don't know, like a National Geographic nature documentary style. That's why they have like the one voice actor doing the overall narration. So it's almost like you're listening to, David Attenborough talk to you about the rats after the crazy pollution and mutation of all species, right? So it's kind of a cool idea. I think they overdid it in that you have to wait for the gibberish of the creatures to speak. Then you have to wait for the narrator, and the writing in the game was very lengthy. I would say there's a lot of like run-on sentences. They repeat themselves with very simple themes over and over and over again. So it's like, and there's like the same dialogue with every single major NPC you talk to. They want to talk to you about doing the right thing. Do you have forgiveness in your heart? Are you this? And the themes are very, I don't want to say juvenile, because I feel like that's just kind of a little too harsh, but it means like it's more, it feels like it's more for a younger audience, and they didn't really do anything to help bring the older audiences, everyone that's like, I would say anyone above 17, right, into the game, because it was just very childlike in a lot of ways. And the things that you wanted to do with the mounts that you would get, like you got this cool mecha hand mount that you could ride that ended up doing very little damage and didn't scale with you properly. So you never really wanted to use it, and it was slower than everything. So all the moments where you get really excited because something cool and unique is about to happen, you end up getting that feeling taken away, because either it's not balanced properly, it's not implemented properly, or it has issues that make it unusable. It's just one of those things where, it's almost like they set this bar and then they're under the bar for most things. The overall RPG system is interesting, right? Changing your body form with the mutation based on your stat distribution. You have all these affixes for weapons that can scale off the stats that you have. So you can do a high movement speed agility build and then get agility weapons. You can do a high strength build like I did with two-handers. You can do a ranged build. Speaking on the abilities, I think there were not enough abilities, or they just didn't do the ability progression in a way that felt good, right? So the way the abilities work, like the Wung Fu martial arts with all your weapons, there's a bunch of weapons, and each one comes with, say, 5 to 7 abilities. On almost every single weapon, you start out with 5 of those abilities, and then you get to unlock 1 or 2 more. But the 4 or 5 that you start with aren't, it's just like a basic melee chain, and then like a dodge attack, and then a block attack or a move attack, and then you have like 1 or 2 cool special moves. But the gameplay of the combat with Wung Fu got very repetitive, because it wasn't easy to switch between weapons and do different move sets like you can in other games that have those kind of like weapon styles. And it was very difficult to really not use anything but the 2 specials that you have. So it felt like there wasn't a lot of progression in the ability department. Most of the grinding was just around getting good gear, good add-ons, good base weapons that you find in vaults and things like that. There were some really awesome moments that I encountered, like finding a big, massive world boss, killing it, getting a vault key, and then going to the vault hidden somewhere else, opening it and getting like a 6-star base weapon. Stuff like that's awesome. There were some encounters in the open world that felt really engaging and interesting and unique, but I would say that half the time the mobs that I got excited about bugged out in some way. They couldn't path to me, or they couldn't aim their abilities. I fought this giant mini boss that was rolling around on a barrel, and I stood still and he couldn't hit me. He kept going around me on accident, running into a wall. You know, I think there's like an acceptable amount of bugs, and then there's just like in between acceptable and absolutely unplayable. There's like this middle ground of, you know, the uncanny valley of there's not so many bugs that it's not a playable game, but there's enough where it kind of ruins your experience too often. And I think that's kind of where Biomutant sat on launch. I think for a free-to-play game, you would expect that, and that can be cleaned up very easily if this is meant as a game as a service. You know, an initial launch that Biomutant had, you know, that's something you can recover from. And a $60 title that has this many issues is very tough to give a positive amount to. I think if everything worked more or less, and you know, they kept the dialogue the same, you kept the gameplay the same, you kept the progression systems the same, it would probably like a good 6 or 7 out of 10, right? It's got a lot of really cool things going on. I think there's just not enough of the game that worked on launch and through the end. And I think there's a lot of really big detractors that can take away from your experience of playing Biomutant. And it feels like a little bit of a near miss, right? They just barely missed the mark on what they wanted to get. Now, if you love these kind of games, or you just wanted something to run around in, you can certainly pick this up. I honestly can't in good conscience recommend it to you until, you know, at least 6 to 12 months where they've put in a lot of patches and updates where they make the game function properly and they expand on some of the base systems they have there to make them even more engaging. Because it had its moments, but there's definitely a lot you have to overlook and some scuffness that you have to live with if you're going to play it. But it's definitely got potential if they want to, you know, do a DLC or add things in the future. So those are my thoughts on Biomutant. I did finish it just kind of to do my due diligence, but it definitely was very rough around the edges, and not exactly what I was hoping for out of the game, especially with how many elements of construction you get for building your character and its abilities and its stats. And I also think that the visual fidelity, like as the environment was great. There was a lot of really cool vistas that you'd walk up on, like with a sunset or up on a mountain or going down into a cave, or, you know, you'd get these really cool visuals. I think that it seemed like too many of the animations were procedural and not animated by an animator. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it just felt like the enemies were moving in a very robotic way half the time. Sometimes the attacks didn't line up, like the hitboxes weren't in the right place, or the animation that they were making was delayed. So like you'd get hit before, like while they're still winding up, because there's a hitbox for the attack that's there, but not lining up with the animation. So it's just, that's kind of just like the summary, I guess, of Biomutant in my experience with it. So if you enjoyed this game, that's awesome. Happy for you. If you got this good vibe out of it, this is my sense of it. Now remember, I am an ex-game developer, so a lot of these things are, I guess I've kind of trained my brain to see them more intensely than a consumer would, just because I'm used to fixing them. But that's just kind of where my thoughts lie on Biomutant. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I had to be a little bit harsher on this game. I did have fun with it. It's visually interesting. The IP is cool. I think it just from a development standpoint, they under-delivered, and they have some things that they can fix to make the game a lot better. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. So see you in the next one. Cheers.